Welcome everyone, it's Andrew Beach, Executive Career Coach. I'm a teacher of self-education. I help professionals like you communicate your value to find great opportunities faster. That's whether you're working or not. Today, we're continuing our book club series on the #1 networking book, in my humble opinion. Let me make sure I turn that down. Sorry about that. I have my mobile device here to answer any questions that you have. So go ahead and put those in the chat. I would also appreciate it. There's a little arrow down below. If you would share this to your social channels. I want to make this one of the better live coaching sessions, open, of course, to anybody who comes. I want to be able to answer your questions. So please share it and then put any questions you have in the chat. We're going to be covering my favorite networking book. You guessed it. It's the National Business Employment Weekly book on networking. They did a series. This one's called Insider Strategies for Tapping the Hidden Job Market, where most jobs are found. So that's the book. There is a link, I believe, in the comments if you want to pick it up. It's out of print. I don't make any money by selling these things, but I do believe that you'll make money if you implement the ideas that are in today's session. So go ahead and pick up that book if you find it interesting. By all means, take advantage of the learnings that we're going to have today. And I'm going to read from chapter 2 today as we have people come in. Welcome. Again, this is Career Happy Hour. I'm here to answer any questions you have about career, networking, market planning, interviewing, resume, if you must, LinkedIn best practices, anything related to your career, I'm happy to answer. So leave that in the chat. I will go ahead and we'll read half of chapter 2, and then we will actually then look at your questions. I found that chapter 2 was a little bit longer, so I wanted to make sure that we actually had time today to walk through this, because this is one of the more critical processes that a lot of people skip over. They jump into the networking and don't give consideration to looking in the mirror first, looking inward to themselves and to define their product. Okay, so I'm going to read from this book, pages 19 through 36. If you have your copy, you can follow along. But this is titled Defining and Redefining the Product, Chapter 2. Tell me about yourself. There it is, the simplest request that induces anxiety in even the most focused job seekers and generates almost total mental paralysis in career changers. One of the basic purposes of networking is to trigger as much exposure in the job market as possible, so you're left with the question of what to expose. No matter how benignly expressed, the demand to explain yourself resonates with a number of implicit subdemands. Be focused. Be self-aware. Don't ask me to make sense of your life. Be succinct. Don't give me a lot of abstract babble. Don't jive with me. Your tale had better be objective and credible. What do you offer? What value can you add? Explain why you want what you want. Those all seem pretty valid. The tell me about yourself request is the real beginning of most interviews. That is true. And it's also one of the first hurdles that should be approached in any network meeting. Knowing the request is coming and knowing how to fulfill it are two different things. Avoid the most frequently given response. Well, what do you want to know? So you answer a question with a question. This counter question, which throws the responsibility back to the questioner, might be paraphrased. That question is so stupid I can't even begin to answer it. In networking, it's a particularly abrasive response because you, the networker, asked for the meeting and should have an agenda in mind. One memorable real-life networking exchange went like this. And I love that he puts people into the context here and gives a little anecdote. Okay? So I'll try to do two different voices. Networker, thank you for taking the time to see me on such short notice. This isn't a bad start. Contact, you're welcome. How can I help you? Also a good opener. And networker, rattled. Well, I was hoping you could help me in my job search. Contact. I'll do what I can. Why don't you tell me a little about yourself? Networker. Well, what do you want to know? Contact. What do you want me to know? Networker. I don't understand. Contact. Neither do I. Networker. No, I thought you were going to help me. Contact. I'm trying, but I don't know enough about you to know where to start. You're running a job search, right? You're marketing a product. Networker. Yeah. Contact. Voice rising. So what's the product? Networker. Defensive. If I knew that, I wouldn't be networking with you. Contact. Look, you can't just come in here, dump your bucket on my desk, and expect me to put it all together for you. Oh, how true. So many networking conversations are kind of like that, but maybe not as extreme. Believe me, it didn't get any better after this initial exchange. The networker thought the contact was hostile, unhelpful. The contact considered the networker to be unprepared, unfocused, and unwilling to carry his responsibility for keeping the meeting on track. As a networker, you really must be able to do better. Start by determining what you want. You're probably anxious at this point to start creating a whole series of new antennas for yourself. But you can't tune a lot of people to your networking wavelength if your transmission is fuzzy, or if no one knows what channel you're on. Perhaps you have already worked through a detailed self-assessment and vocational profiling and are brimming with articulate self-awareness. Not everybody's like that, by the way. Or perhaps you're among those rare people who are so gifted with innate insight that they know every nook and cranny of their personal profiles. If you fit into either one of these categories, the topics in this chapter may be familiar, but you'll learn some of the vocabulary we'll be using, the issues that will get primary focused, and some methods for making job seekers incredibly self-aware. Establishing a frame of reference. Anyone who has lived long enough to reach job hunting age has gained from experience some sense of his strengths, aptitudes, hot buttons, soft spots, and danger zones. In other words, most adults are self-aware, at least at some semi-conscious nonverbal level. That doesn't mean they can articulate their self-understanding succinctly on demand. Before you start scheduling network meetings, you have to spend some time learning to, number one, think of yourself as an attractive product. And number two, describe yourself clearly as that product. This is easier said than done, no doubt. Each of us is a complex amalgam of forces and factors, a unique blend of nature, nurture, education, experience, and operative values. Confronted with the need to present an articulate and attractive personal profile, actually a product profile, we mustn't forget that we're selling a product to a market. Many of us act like a deer caught in the headlights. What do I put first? What comes last? How much detail do I put in? What do I leave out? How do I organize what stays in? Chronologically, or most important stuff first? Should I build a big finish? The best way to understand how people, networking contacts, and potential employers alike will size you up is to reflect on how you size up other people. When you first meet someone in a business context, what information do you want to know first? What data is essential to describing someone clearly as a product? Consider the following descriptions. I met this extraordinary woman at a conference, Bill. She got out of Wesleyan about the same time as your brother, Len. Got her master's in planning from Ohio State, spent a couple of years at HUD, then left to start her own city planning consulting firm. In 2 years, she's already has major contracts with Dubuque and Spokane. After initially doing everything herself, she now does all the research and writing and has a staff of 4. All women with major smarts like her, who run the office and do the project administration. That's not a bad start. So here's another one. Nice party. Yeah, great hors d'oeuvres. So, what do you do? I'm an outplacement consultant with one of the big New York career consulting firms. No kidding. Maybe I should ask you to find me a job. How long you been at it? Only about 3 years, actually. And before that, here it comes. Well, I started my career as a minister up in Maine. While I was chaplain at a prison up there, I put in a lot of educational programs, and they asked me to become assistant warden. Did that for about 8 years, actually left the ministry, although I still did a lot of counseling. By then I had family and needed some more income, and a guy who knew me and my work wanted me to join the human resources department of a Fortune 150 company's marine colloid division in Portland, Maine, I'm assuming. It was a big change, but I really enjoyed the job until I was transferred to Philadelphia. I can imagine. That got old real fast, and I was doing a lot of career and family counseling on the side, and I liked that. Met a guy at a conference who asked me if I wanted to combine everything I've ever done into one job, and boom, I was an outplacement consultant. Go figure. Kind of sounds like my story, actually, except for the counseling stuff and, well, Maine, Portland, Oregon instead. If you look closely at these profiles, you'll notice that each provides a frame of reference, FOR for short. Remember this phrase, we're going to beat it to death in this book. The FOR, frame of reference, is anchored in 3 dimensions, each of which addresses fundamental questions that must be answered in order to describe someone, including yourself, as a product. Number 1, level. How much experience do you have? How flat or how steep is your learning curve? And how much money is it going to cost to employ you? So that's level. Number 2, roles and functions. Exactly what can you do for your next employer? What is your primary area of competency? What other skills and abilities can you contribute? How do you most want to be used? And yes, some people are used. Anyway, just a small joke there. That's number 2. Number 3, setting. Where have you performed most recently, and how similar was that setting to the one in which you're now seeking employment? What earlier settings did you perform in? What does the chronology of settings in which you worked during your career imply about the kind of setting you most like working in? Here's the thing. A lot of people have done certain things, and often we look at our past as a series of experiences, chronologies, and we don't inform those based on what we're seeking or what we desire or what we prefer. So sometimes we need to look at our brand and our frame of reference, in this case, as a choice. We're choosing to share certain parts of our experience that we really enjoyed. Unless and until a listener has at least some information on all these areas, level, roles, and functions, and settings, he's missing crucial pieces of your profile and can't describe you to someone else. That's the key, right? Is giving somebody a message that they can carry to the marketplace and describe to a third party. Or decide that he might want to employ you himself. That would be great. Conveying your frame of reference does not have to be a lengthy process. Say you met an old friend in a movie line and she says, "What do you do?" You don't have half an hour to flesh out the details, but in 1 or 2 sentences, you can provide enough general information to create a basic product profile. It'll look like this. For the past 8 years, I've been in charge of sales support for a small importer of Tibetan toupees in Topeka. Mainly, I organize and track the new leads generated by customer information cards in GQ, Tonsorial Monthly, and Modern Maturity magazines. Level, 8 years. Roles and functions, manage the sales support. Setting, small Topeka importer, are all there. Based on this brief but pithy movie line summary, perhaps you'll get a call from her brother, the product manager, for a whole line of personal grooming products at Gillette. This sort of thing happens all the time, but not if you can't teach others how to describe you in 3 essential dimensions. Level can be suggested in many ways. Number of years out of college, I would not recommend that, Bo. Level really should be based on scope of responsibility, leadership, that sort of thing. I think years of experience or years out of school is a frame of reference that's not relevant. What is relevant? Your scope of responsibility. Job, so here it is. Years out of college or grad school, job title, scope of authority, age, budget responsibility, and so on. For career changers, however, the question of level poses an interesting problem. An individual can be very experienced in a prior role or setting and can have tons of life-tempered judgment and street smarts and still be an absolute beginner in a newly chosen field. An employer will therefore have to expend some time and money developing these new competencies, but he'll be investing those resources on a mature, motivated person. You have to be motivated to make a major career change, right? How much credit should be given to a high level of authority or responsibility in a prior work life? Any career changer's frame of reference has to anticipate and address that question. So really what he's saying is you really have to interpret your experience in a new and different way. Roles and functions are straightforward. What is it you can do? What value do you bring to the employer? Can you prove it? Like the movie line example above, this description can be short and tight. Generally speaking, however, the more time you have to explain your frame of reference, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, a whole hour, I would not suggest that. In a networking conversation, you really want to get the other person engaged. So as little as you can give about yourself, the better. The more action verbs you could add. What action verbs? What are you describing as activity? Too many people tend to describe themselves in terms of I am. It's far more effective to describe yourself in terms of I do. What do I do? Although I am, I think, is a good attention grabber. It's something that really can get people's attention as you go into the part about what you do. Here's some examples. I manage the compensation and benefits function. I evaluate potential merger and acquisition targets. I operate a fish processing company. That sounds awful. I drive the little circus clown car with the other 25 clowns tucked in behind me. Oh, he's funny. Action verbs get remembered. Passive verbs do not. The issue of motivation enters into roles and functions. There's an enormous difference between what someone is capable of doing and what they're temperamentally suited to do, which is why more than 2/3 of people surveyed in the United States routinely say they dislike their jobs. Someone's functional resume, for example, may list 5 or 6 areas of competency: administration, staff development, treasury, management information systems, human resources, project management, and the like. But no relative pecking order is given for these claimed functional competencies. Which does the person do best? Which one does he want to do most? Those are great questions. What do you do best, and which do you want to do the most? The question of setting focuses not on what you can do, but on where you want to do it. A potential employer wants to know all about your last work setting in order to compare it with a possible new setting. The more similar the two settings are in their nature, scope, and operative features, the more the employer can infer that whatever you accomplish there, you can accomplish again. Past performance indicates future result. Because employers are natural risk reducers. That's interesting. So remember that employers are natural risk reducers. This is a logical inquiry. A review of your prior work settings can reveal a lot of your motivational map. Where you choose to work and how long you stayed in each setting can send some pretty strong signals that certain kinds of settings are comfortable and highly motivating for you. That's why we shouldn't rely on a resume, and others are turnoffs. If your resume shows that you worked 2 years in the private sector, then 16 years in nonprofits, it's the reader entitled to infer something about your value system. Yeah. So if you rely on your resume, that's what you get. Or if your career path starts with a Fortune 500 multinational, heads off into a specialized division, does 180 into a startup consulting firm with 15 employees and no job titles, and finally levels off into a sole proprietorship, isn't it fair to assume that your career path expresses a theory of choices and is relevant to the kind of setting you'd be happy in? I think it would be irrelevant because really it looks like you were seeking things, which means you're probably adept at navigating different perspectives and challenges. The problem this issue poses for career changers is obvious. A conventional job seeker who presents a linear career profile, ever increasing responsibilities in a progression of roles in general, similar settings, is easily pigeonholed. The frame of reference is clear and unambiguous. But when confronted with someone who's making a major shift in level, role, or setting, the job market raises some immediate alarms. Is this a flight to something or from something? Why move away from the stability and comfort of an established career identity? Is this a rational reasoned move or an impulsive symptom of a mid-career crisis? All these are valid, especially if you rely on just your LinkedIn profile or your resume. Career changers, in effect, have to be ready for two frames of reference, one that describes their past work life and another that describes their future objectives, kind of like a bridging technique. They will also have to be ready with a bridge, a credible explanation of the factors and timing that have led to their decision to make a change. That's my story. In fact, ask me about it at the end. The product profile pieces of the puzzle. By now it's probably dawned on you that your frame of reference isn't a complete product description of all you are and all you have to offer. It's the tightest, most abbreviated version of you that is still able to sketch a market identity. It's an essential first step, not the last word. When someone on the commuter train tells you, I've been director of new product development of a billion-dollar multinational chemical manufacturer for 10 years, she's inviting you to pigeonhole her in terms of generic categories. Now, it's okay to be pigeonholed or put in a box as long as you want to be in that box. Her frame of reference tells you that she's in line management, not a staff job, and she's in chemicals, not pharmaceuticals or consumer products, that she has functioned long and successfully in a large bureaucratic organization, and that she's an experienced manager, not a freshly minted MBA. Suppose, however, that she was in the running for a new position where every one of her competitors was basically like her, an experienced new product development director in a major corporation. Now the question becomes, what traits, features, and accomplishments distinguish her from other similar people? In this context, the request to tell me about yourself demands a much greater level of detail. Without some intensive structured self-assessment before the job search begins, which is what we're talking about today, and before networking commences in earnest, you cannot hope to present a clear, confident, and controlled rendition of me the product. Ask not what others can do for you. This is a good time to clarify who's responsible for what in the networking process. Through networking, you can acquire information, which is obviously why they call it an informational interview, even though we won't be using those terms, that will help focus, clarify, and reality test your career or job search objectives. But you must understand that it isn't the duty of networking contacts to substitute their judgment for your own self-analysis. The initial responsibility for figuring yourself out is yours. And you should come to your networking contacts prepared to say, in effect, I've done my homework, and everything points to my being competent and happy doing blank. I'd welcome your thoughts on whether this is realistic, and if so, how I might best translate my objectives into appropriate employment. This is not the same as saying, gee, Charlie, I'm utterly lost. What should I do with my life? There are a number of approaches to conducting a detailed, objective vocational assessment. You can stand in front of your bathroom mirror and shout, mirror, mirror, tell me true. What in God's name shall I do? That's awesome. You can buy any of a number of self-assessment books. We look at StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, DISC, Standout. There's a whole bunch of them out there. You can buy any one of those, or the increasingly popular software programs that will work you through a series of questions or exercises intended to get you to look systematically at your strengths, preferences, and weaknesses. Such solo approaches are subject to two major problems, and these are all valid. One, garbage in, garbage out. And two, over-idealization. sometimes called kidding yourself or reinventing yourself. Both of these forms of distortion can be diminished by enlisting some form of outside help: a cool-headed spouse or significant other, a trusted friend, a support group, or a professional career counselor, like me, to serve as an objective sounding board. The self-assessment process can be entirely subjective and qualitative, or it can include administration and feedback of a variety of standardized instruments that measure everything from intelligence and personality preferences to interest patterns and operative value systems. Although a detailed discussion of career reappraisal and vocational skills assessment is beyond the scope of this book, we can talk generally about self-profiling. How can your assessment information be organized and presented for the best possible communication to networking contacts and potentially employers? That's a good question. In response to tell me about yourself in detail, too many people lump distinctly different kinds of attributes together in a kind of undifferentiated hash. You'll be far clearer and far more in control if you learn to keep your ingredients separate. TS, TA, and PQ. They're acronyms. Every person's work identity can be described as a combination of three ingredients. Number one, technical skills, or TS. My dad would call that something different. Number two, transferable abilities. Number three, which are TAs. My dad would call that something different too. Number three, personal qualities, or PQs. Different kinds of jobs can involve distinctly different percentages of each of these ingredients. A nuclear energy plant's control room operator uses heavy transferable skills. A poet's work requires a reservoir of personal qualities, but some mixture of the basic vocational building blocks is present in any visible job candidate. So what I'd recommend is you get the book, because there's a number of exercises here that you can execute. When we speak of technical skills here, we're using the word skill in a particular way, not simply as another word for competency. For our purposes, a technical skill is a body of knowledge, and the way you describe a technical skill is to say, I know it. For example, I know Lotus 123, or I know Russian, or I know the federal regulations that govern the interstate transportation of chickens, or I know that every switch and light in this nuclear control room does. Another word for technical skill is expertise. Here are some other examples of transferable skills: fourth generation computer languages, organic chemistry, the rules of contract bridge, the maximum RPM of the Model 3600 drill press, third-party reimbursement procedures under Medicare, and so on. Get the idea? When asked to describe themselves, many people naturally start by describing areas of technical expertise. Why? Because expertise tends to be yes or no. Either you know something or you don't. Sounds like most of the things that would happen based on reviewing your resume. You either have that skill or you don't. If I were to put a gun to some poor networker's head and say, you have 50 seconds to list your primary areas of expertise, chances are the person would survive. Most people can describe their transferable skills or technical skills pretty well, even under stress. A word often substituted for technical skills is credentials. Specific references to a job seeker's formal educational background. Education frequently has little predictive validity, and that is true today, and this book is from the 90s, so that's still true, even more so, for on-the-job success. Yet many short-sighted employers fixate on credentials. Where'd you go to school? What was your grade point average? What were your scores on the SATs? They think they're asking, what do you know? A petty over-reliance on credentials is one of the major blind spots of the job market and the hiring process. No doubt, judging somebody based on their credentials or their resume is certainly a vulnerability. Some interesting characteristics of technical skills may not be readily evident, but are important to constructing a vocational profile. First, a young person can know a given technical skill just as well as an older person, so years of experience not relevant. Indeed, he often knows it better, perhaps because he just finished courses on the latest thinking in the field. Second, you can acquire more technical skills at any point in your career, and I highly recommend you do that. If you want to need If you want or need some kind of expertise or some new credentials badly enough, you can always go back to school, attend a seminar, or ask for on-the-job training. Want to start scuba diving? Go learn the skills in scuba diving class. The third point requires a little thinking over. A technical skill creates a pigeonhole. It tends to define or be defined by the setting in which it is used. Here's what I mean. If I were to tell you I know COBOL, I would be placing myself in your mind in a room with an old-fashioned mainframe computer, the only setting in which that technical skill is relevant. COBOL has no value whatsoever on camping trips or in negotiations for collective bargaining agreements. If I say my practice requires expertise in the federal rules of criminal procedure, then 1, I'm a lawyer. 2, I'm a criminal lawyer. And 3, I'm a criminal lawyer practicing in federal court. That body of expertise probably does me little good in state court and none at all in the racquetball court. Another way of making this point is to say that technical skills aren't transferable. One of their greatest virtues is that they define neat labels or categories that we can assign ourselves. When a doctor says, I am a thoracic surgeon, he's telling you that he possesses at least a minimal amount of technical skills required to use that label to describe himself. He also is telling you that what he isn't. He isn't a brain surgeon. He isn't an orthopedic surgeon, and he isn't a radiologist. For our model, technical skills are a logical first line of self-definition. How can you catalog your technical skills? Simple. Get a piece of paper and a pen and a pencil, sit down where you can write comfortably, and list them on paper. If it adds incentive, imagine a gun at your head. I'm not saying I don't want to show up on the the scanners at the local police station. If you're pursuing a linear career path, focus on technical skills that are relevant to your calling in area of expertise. If you're thinking of making a career shift or feeling low on the self-esteem department, broaden your inventory to include all the areas in which you have technical skills. Do you know how to cross-pollinate an orchid? Know how to mix a high-fire ceramic glaze? Know what kind of crown molding was used in English architecture between 1790 and 1830? Know the best mixture of cheeses for making a great lasagna? My wife would know that. Once you start listing your technical skills, you'll be amazed at all the things you know. Next, you have to do some prioritizing, and I advocate this highly. You aren't going to sell all your technical skills to your next employer or even to a networking contact. So choose the ones that best define your fundamental product identity, which will be the most important or absolutely required when you are considering for a position in your line of work. When you've completed and prioritized your list, create a vocational profile template like the one shown in table 2.1. And obviously, if you have the book, you'd be able to see that. And write your technical skills into the left-hand column. There's 3 columns for each of those categories. Once they've tallied their technical skills, describe my credentials, they may call it, many people think their self-assessment is done. They've defined the product. Now it's time to start networking and job searching. Wrong. Your technical skills tell the job market only whether you're entitled to play. If you lack the technical skills a certain job requires, by definition, you're incompetent for that job. The rest of your profile, no matter how attractive, is irrelevant. The vertical line on table 2.1 is meant to represent a screen, as in the screening interview. Screening out the turkeys, a screening ad, and so on. A demon set of credentials, your 4.0 from MIT as a nuclear physics major, will get you through the screen faster than a Medicare set, your 2.4 in underwater basket weaving from Larry, Moe, and Curly's 3-way university. But it doesn't determine your overall attractiveness to the job market, and it certainly doesn't define the kind of setting in which you'd be happiest or most productive. One common job search myth is that the best qualified person gets the job, and I've seen that over and over again. It's so true. The person most qualified almost never gets the job. If that translates to the person with the snazziest technical skills will always prevail, it's not true. At some point, you've probably received some version of this letter, and we've all had these, right? Dear Mr. Jones, although your credentials are indeed impressive, We have selected a candidate who better fits our needs. Gosh, these letters haven't changed, have they? Best of luck in your future endeavors. Frustrating, isn't it? You bet. What in the world do they mean by fit? Chemistry or rapport or other vagaries? The notion of fit strikes most of us as hopelessly subjective, and another recipe for hash, rather like Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's definition of pornography. I can define it, but I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Are the ingredients of fit unknowable and uncontrollable? If we hit it off with a networking contact or a potential employer, is it strictly a matter of chance? Figuring out fit. If the best qualified person doesn't always get the job, who does? The person who makes the employer most comfortable. What qualities make an employer most comfortable? Number 1, strong evidence that the candidate can do what he claims, that he can add immediate, tangible value in exchange for the employer's bucks, meaning money. So that's kind of like the STAR format or the SOAR stories, right? The creating of an anecdote that demonstrates your competence. Number 2, a personal style or a set of traits and values that are compatible with the employer's. Table 2.1, they refer to that again. On the left of the vertical line or screen is labeled credentials, and the 2 columns on the right of the screen are labeled fit. Once you're through the screen, you must get to the real heart of the self-assessment and self-definition, which could be a phone screen or an on-site interview. This distinguishes you from all other job seekers who may have similar credentials. The first component on the fit side of the template is your particular array of transferable abilities. Let me emphasize that in our nomenclature, skills and abilities are very different. If expertise is the synonym for particular technical skill, then the synonym for transferable abilities is experience. Suppose you say to me, I have the ability to run a 4-minute mile. All that phrase really means is, I have run a 4-minute mile at least once. Somewhere in your past, that is, in your experience, is a 4-minute mile, and logic says that if you were able to do it once, presumably you can do it again. If I am an employer who runs a courier service and values employers who are fleet of foot, the best proof of what you can do for me is what you have done before. Remember this principle. Abilities equals past behaviors equals experience. The best way to describe a transferable ability is to say, I have done X, not I know X. When someone says in a networking meeting or at an interview, I think they're synonymous. The outcomes are a little different. I have the ability to keep my head when those are about me are ready to lose theirs. He's paraphrasing some prior experience. I have performed calmly in situations that involve great emotional stress. If this line of logic holds true, then every job seeker naturally should be articulate at describing his abilities, his experience, right? Isn't he just describing accomplishments that have already happened? If you think it's all that easy for the average person to rattle off his abilities, imagine another gun at your temple and respond to this command. In the next 30 seconds, please list your 6 most significant transferable abilities in priority order. Ready? Go. If your mind turned to a cotton during these 30-second exercise, you're not alone. Most of us are self-aware. That is, we can remember the things we've done in our lives, and we have clear images of the ones that turned out well. But having an implicit understanding of our past accomplishments doesn't mean that we can call those accomplishments up in our mind's eye on demand and communicate them explicitly to someone else. In this phase of your self-assessment process, your task is to inventory the experiences and accomplishments you've already had and learn to describe them in terms that are meaningful and attractive to the job market. Before we discuss how to do that, however, you may want to know where transferable comes into our discussion in transferable abilities. Unlike technical skills, which tend to be anchored to a particular setting, transferable abilities aren't confined to any one job or situation. As an example, consider troubleshooting, a classic transferable ability. If you turn into a demon troubleshooter when the document package for a real estate closing is missing a few pages, you'll find that the same ability emerging when things threaten to get out of hand at a PTA meeting, or when the caterer delivers your daughter's wedding cake to the wrong house, or when the car starts making strange noises a half hour after you pass the last chance gas station in the Nevada desert. This element of transferability is the salvation of career changers. It is first and foremost what they have to learn to sell. Suppose you did a splendid job of planning and implementing a new employee assistance program at Mega Big Manufacturing. Isn't it fair to infer that you'd be pretty good at developing and running a community outreach program for your city's Department of Aging, of course, or developing a new tuition reimbursement program at your local university, of course, or helping to get an outward bound program up and running for any inner city kids, of course. The setting has changed from private sector to government or academia to nonprofit human services, but the underlying ability, let's label it program development, is readily transferable. The trick then is to learn to describe your transferable abilities in terms that are succinct enough to register clearly in the mind of a networking contact or potential employer. The best way to do this is to think of your accomplishments and experiences in terms of their functional components. For example, the ability to organize complex data and information, the ability to organize the activities of people, to build trust with people you don't know, to think strategically or tactically. There's a whole list of them here. If you have the book, go through those. In emphasizing your transferable abilities to the job market, what you're really doing is proving your ability to generalize, to apply experience gained in one setting to another one. Let's see. In making cabinet selections, the president doesn't focus primarily on technical skills. Have you ever been a Secretary of State before? On the contrary, he's looking for desired strengths and competencies that have been amply demonstrated in other settings. For younger networkers or anyone at the outset of a working career, the transferable abilities column poses a major problem. How do you sell your experience and past accomplishments when you aren't old enough or working long enough to have any? The time-honored answer is that those who don't have much experience to sell must rely primarily on other categories in the template. They can sell their technical skills. I just got out of school with a degree in computer science and expertise in fourth-generation languages, or their personal qualities, intelligence, energy, interpersonal abilities, and so on. Some younger job seekers are helped by the fact that some abilities aren't developed through life experience. Instead, they stem from natural aptitude. Not everyone brings significant natural aptitude to the job market, but a gene pool will occasionally load a person with some powerful natural tools. Quantitative aptitude, mathematical aptitude, creativity, critical thinking, logic, visual, spatial perception, and physical endurance. A journalist once asked Greg LeMond, champion bike racer and three-time winner of the Tour de France, how to become a world-class racer. First, said LeMond, get yourself a set of parents with the right genes. If you're blessed with a natural aptitude, you know it. It generally will have emerged long before you became old enough to begin work. Your main task, therefore, will be 1, finding a way to describe the natural aptitude succinctly, and 2, convincing others that you in fact do have it. As noted on the template, most transferable abilities are described by saying, I have done. I have done. Aptitudes are described by saying, I am natural at. Frequently, a natural aptitude will not constitute the core of what you're doing, what you're going to sell to the working world, except perhaps in singing or musical performance. More often, aptitudes serve as enhancers of other qualities and should be described that way. Okay, the only 2 career-changing strategies. If you understand the difference between technical skills and transferable abilities, then you'll be able to see that there are only 2 functional strategies for career change. After you renounce one set of technical skills and hence the setting in which they pertain, I hereby unbecome an accountant. You can either 1, acquire a new set of technical skills by going back to school, taking seminars, or otherwise re-educating, or 2, concentrate on marketing your transferable abilities, your experience in a new setting, which is what I would recommend. Get the employer to pay for the training. The main virtue of the first strategy is that you never lose your identity. I used to be a CPA. Now I'm a marine biologist. The rub, of course, is that you lose level. You must stop your career, go back to school, and reemerge as a beginner. When you recast yourself in terms of your transferable abilities, you have a better chance of maintaining level. People understand that they have to pay for experience, but you lose your identity until you acquire a new one as defined by your new role. In the meantime, you're just an X something. I'm a former CPA with a bunch of transferable abilities. The ability to organize complex data, for example, that could be put to good use in a series of different kinds of jobs, like data science. Getting personal. The idea of fit, both from your point of view and from your eventual employers, starts with understanding what you have to sell, your particular mix of skills and abilities. From there on, your personal qualities will determine whether you'll enjoy a certain kind of job or work setting and whether a particular employer will be comfortable and will feel a sense of rapport with you. Getting enough distance from yourself to develop an objective personal perspective isn't an easy task. It's actually why I have a job. A lot of components combine to determine your individual mix of personal qualities, your gene pool, your social, religious, economic milieu, and the values and biases to which you were exposed growing up, major life events, both positive and negative, your role models, the expectations of your family, friends, peers, and colleagues, your operative values, your own unique biography. Without umpteen years of psychoanalysis, it may seem impossible to get a handle on all that makes you, you. For our purposes here, your personal qualities translate into a set of preferences concerning your type of work, work setting, and coworkers. These preferences define what makes you comfortable and productive. By personal qualities, we don't mean the Boy Scout virtues: kind, trustworthy, brave, obedient, cheerful. Personal qualities are those dimensions of your character or personality that determine what motivates you, gratifies you, delights you, annoys you, terrifies you, or brings about the worst in you. Put another way, your technical skills and transferable abilities tell what you have to sell, and your personal qualities focus on what you ought to be buying in your next job, what you should expect and demand of any role that's truly a good fit. The point of networking through the often uncomfortable process of holding a mirror up to your psyche isn't just to acquire a lot of abstract information. It's to identify job situations and potential colleagues. That's valuable too. Finding the right people to work with is part of this process. So what you're buying includes evaluating the colleagues and leaders that you'd be working for. Is to identify job situations and potential colleagues that recognize and value your interests, style, values, and preferences in thought and action. It's much easier to shop for a job if you're clear about what it will take to make you contented, challenged, and vocationally well-fed. Amen. In developing a meaningful career path, it's absolutely crucial to attend to and honor your personal values. Before you get heavily into networking or interviewing, much less decide on whether to accept any one job opportunity, it's important to ask yourself what personal values need to find expression in your work. Wow, that's huge. So knowing how you want to use those personal qualities is important. Service to others, creative expression, competing and winning, security, friendship, independence, mastery, power and control, personal integrity, recognition, career advancement. Reminds me of the 5 love languages. If you've never read that, I think it's Gary Chapman, 5 love languages. Making lots of money, balancing work, family, and leisure priorities. If your work doesn't support your personal values, your problem isn't establishing a fit with an employer, it's a lack of fit with yourself. Your personal qualities also are important on the sell side of the equation, that is, in establishing a sense of comfort with the employer. A wise old headhunter once confided, there really are only 2 interview questions. 1, what can you do for me? And 2, why do you want this job anyway? In other words, understanding your motivation is important to an employer. It's actually one of the most common questions. It may not be as important as the value of your skills and abilities represent, but no employer should want to hire someone who's temperamentally unsuited to the job, even if the person is capable of performing satisfactorily. When we use abstract words like rapport and chemistry to describe fit, we're really talking about something much more pragmatic. The employer's sense that your job-related priorities, values, and motivations are in sync with his. In seminars, I often pose a question that stymies the troops. You ready for this? Most employers will tell you that they want an employee who is goal-oriented. They'll also say that they want an employee who is results-oriented. What's the difference? What's the difference? Goal-oriented versus results-oriented. Give up? Think of results orientation as a psychological craving for measurable outcomes, for closure, for the bottom line. According to one preference measuring instrument, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, about 75% of the people in the United States are truly results-oriented. That is, they're more interested in ends and outcomes than in means or the quality of the journey. Any employer who operates in the private sector has got to be fundamentally concerned with outcomes, and when hiring, will look for evidence that an applicant shares the emphasis on getting things done. Goal orientation is different. A goal, put simply, is something you want. Goal orientation, therefore, is a measure of what you want and how much you want it. It's another term for motivation. In addition to a solid results orientation, almost every employer looks for an appropriately motivated employee rather than a bored, listless, or indifferent employee. That's where interview preparation really helps, is you can certainly muster up some excitement. So that brings us to the end of page 36. So we'll pick up the second half of chapter 2 next week. But it looks like we have some questions here. Hey, John, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Start by understanding yourself, very similar to a fundamental rule in lean. You have to understand your current state before you plan where you're going. Absolutely. That's a great observation, John. I appreciate it. Is the book equating credentials with skills? Yes, I think so. Those are hard skills. So it's technical skills versus transferable abilities. So both might be considered skill. And skill can be a kaleidoscope, like a spectrum, right? Any strategies to identifying hiring managers at my target companies within LinkedIn, perhaps looking for senior director in their title? Yeah, so when you do a search, Joel, in LinkedIn, there's a little thing there that says filter by people. Of course, that'll show you all the people. You've probably already done that. And then there's a second filter there that says all filters. And you should be able to scroll down and put in director as a title. And it should pop up all the directors at that company, assuming you filtered by company. So there's a couple ways to do that. You can either filter by the company, or you can go to the company page and say, look at all employees at this company and filter that way. So let's see. How do you approach when connecting with hiring managers on LinkedIn if we are total strangers, have no commonalities, no shared? You got to look at something on their profile or something that the company is going through, a common thing in the industry, perhaps a problem you solve or have solved in the past. I think that's all valid. Okay. So good. I want to thank you for joining me this FAQ Friday, this career happy hour. I got to head out to an appointment. So I want to thank you. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. In the chat, use the hashtag Career Happy Hour, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Have a great weekend. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Happy President's Day as well. And we'll see you next Friday. Take care.